CBS News coverage of Election Night 68. Reporting from election headquarters, Walter Cronkite.
Well, it's midnight in the East, and all we know right now about the presidential race is that it is very, very close. It may be the closest in our history. Right now, with 36% of the popular vote counted, Hubert Humphrey holds a lead over Richard Nixon, 42% to 41%, 13,330,000, you're going to see a change there, 371,000 to Nixon's 13,041,000. With each new return, Humphrey pulls just a little bit, a few thousand votes further away from Richard Nixon. He took the lead about an hour ago and is holding on to it. George Wallace has 17% of the vote, 5.25 million votes. In the electoral count, first we have a CBS News estimate in the state of New Mexico. Richard Nixon will win New Mexico as anticipated. Our CBS News estimate tells us Nixon should win with 54% of the vote, Humphrey 39%, and Wallace 7% in New Mexico. That will give Richard Nixon 161 electoral votes. Hubert Humphrey 143 electoral votes. Nixon is leading for 28 other electoral votes, which would give him a total of 189. Humphrey is leading for 3 electoral votes, which would give him a total of 146. Wallace has 4 states with 39 electoral votes, the solid southern states of Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana, which have gone for states' rights, Dixiecrat candidates before, and he is leading in Arkansas, which would give him another 6 electoral votes. In the Senate, the 34 races at stake, the Democrats have won 8 and the Republicans 10. In the House of Representatives, the Democrats have elected 125 and the Republicans 72. Let's take a look at the makeup of the new House of Representatives, region by region, and we'll start out with Mike Wallace in the East.
Well, Walter, the Democrats so far have elected 28 congressmen. The Republicans have elected 21. The Democrats are leading with 12, the Republicans leading with 6. So in the new House, 40 new Democrats, 27 new Republicans. I say new, of course, some of them are incumbents. And as you can see, with the present status of the outgoing House, 74 to 48, Democrats over Republicans, the complexion of the House in the East is just about the same. Incidentally, House Speaker John McCormick from Massachusetts won re-election easily, and Adam Clayton Powell, the Harlem Democrat who was elected twice to the 90th Congress but excluded by his colleagues, swept to an easy victory here in New York. One additional House race of some interest. In Pennsylvania, Gus Yatron, a Democrat, is the winner in the 6th Congressional District race. Now that's important because that district was considered a swing one, which the Republicans needed to gain control of that Pennsylvania delegation.
Hate to interrupt you, but Hubert Humphrey, who is the front runner right at the moment, is arriving at the Leamington Hotel in Minneapolis from his home in Waverly, and you see there's quite a mob scene. Morton Dean is there.
This is Vice President Humphrey in this crush is on his way into the Leamington Hotel, and it's quite a scene here, a struggle between the security agents and the news people here to get the Vice President and Mrs. Humphrey through. Humphrey smiling broadly.
Why don't you get out of the way?
Okay. How do you feel, Mr. Vice President?
Fine.
You're smiling broadly for the first time in weeks.
Well,
Okay, open it up, please.
All right, let's go. David, out of the way.
Mr. Vice President, can we talk to you just for a moment, please? It's going to be a long night. Is it going to be a long night, Mr. Vice President?
Right it is.
How are you going to do in California?
You'd never believe what's going on, Walter. They have got us jammed against the wall. The Vice President at least has made it into the elevator, and so has Mrs. Humphrey. And it's another victory for the Secret Service. I think I heard the Vice President say that he thought it was going to be a long night. I also think that I heard him say that he was going to do well in California. And now as I take the various elbows out of my ribs, I'll switch it back to you.
We've got some, very quickly, I want to give you some CBS News estimates of winners in Senate and gubernatorial races. Then we want to go back and look at how these House races are going. In South Dakota, CBS News says that George McGovern will win his race for re-election for his Democratic seat. In the Senate, Archie Gabrud will lose 55 to 45. In Kansas, an upset. The Democratic incumbent Robert Docking will be re-elected, according to our CBS News estimate, over the Republican challenger Rick Harmon, restaurant operator. In Iowa, the Republican candidate Ray will defeat the Democratic candidate Franzenberg for Harold Hughes' seat as the governor. Hughes is running for the Senate and having a very close race there. In Arizona, Jack Williams has beaten Sam Goddard again in a rematch. Jack Williams, an incumbent Republican senator. And now, Mike, can we go, excuse me just a moment. We'll have a small commercial to pay the freight, and then we'll come back to you for the House race. The CBS News color coverage of Election Night 68 will continue in a moment. With the popular vote, 42% of it in now, according to our figures here. Hubert Humphrey is lengthening his lead just a bit by bit. He now still has 42% to 41 for Nixon, but his lead is a little over 350,000, 13,999,000 to 13,643,000 for Nixon. In Kentucky, CBS News estimates that the Republican candidate for the seat being vacated by retiring Republican Senator Thurston Morton will go to the Republican Marlowe Cook over the Democratic candidate Catherine Peden. And now let's resume our look at the House races and Mike Wallace.
And we'll resume our look at Gus Yatron, who was a Democrat and the winner in the 6th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. And that is important, as I said, because the district was considered a swing one, and the Republicans needed it to gain control of that Pennsylvania delegation, which before today was lined up 14 to 13, Democrats over Republicans. If the Republicans controlled the delegation and the election eventually wound up in the House, it was conceivable that Nixon and not Humphrey would get that one vote from the Pennsylvania delegation. However, it looks as though Pennsylvania will stay Democratic, and Humphrey, in case the election does go to the House of Representatives, would have that one Pennsylvania vote. In the rest of the East, the House seats remain just about the same. Not much change, Walter.
Let's go now to Dan Rather for a look at the House races in the Middle West. Dan?
Well, Walter, there were 125 congressional seats up in the Midwest this time. The breakdown as we went into today's election, the Midwest heavily Republican as far as the congressional representation is concerned. Republicans 80 seats and the Democrats 45 seats. That's as we started today's election. Now let's go up to our House Midwest board with 125 seats up. We show the Democrats elected, according to our CBS News estimates, in 21 seats, the Republicans elected in 28, the Democrats leading in 16 congressional seats, the Republicans leading for 22. So the totals, as of the moment, would appear to be in the new House, the Democrats out of the Midwest with 37 seats, the Republicans with 50, the rest undecided at this moment. And to repeat, the present breakdown is 45 and 80. Now, the importance here, the Republicans had expected to rack up a considerable number of House gains in the Midwest, but they expected to run better in the Midwest than they are in fact running. And so it's still a bit early, but I would say that in the Midwest, the breakdown will probably remain about the same. Very important to keep an eye on the state of Illinois, not only because it is shaking down very close in both the popular vote totals in Illinois, but also in the congressional races. Illinois, a state with 26 electoral votes, had an even 12-12 breakdown for its 24 congressional seats. Now, if the presidential race should go into the House of Representatives, as you know, each state gets only one ballot. And if a state breaks out even in the vote, then it in effect gets no vote, if you follow me. A state like Illinois, if in caucus it voted 12-12, it would come out with no vote if the presidential race went into the House. So we'll keep an eye on Illinois as to see whether its congressional seats stay even or whether it tips over to one side or the other, Republican or Democratic. In general, in the Midwest, Walter, I don't expect there'll be much change between what we have now, which is 80 Republican seats and 45 Democratic.
And what about the House races in the South, Roger?
Well, Walter, the lead out of the South is almost no change. The Republican Party failed or is failing to break Democratic control of any Southern delegation. There was some hope that they could do it in North Carolina. Apparently they have failed. They did win the seat in the new 5th District. Old Vinegar Ben Mizell, the old St. Louis Cardinals ball player, is the new congressman from Winston-Salem. He beat the grandson of R.J. Reynolds. And in the 6th District in Greensboro, the Democrats won that one. Richardson Pryor, a moderate in North Carolina politics, defeated Bill Osteen, a moderate Republican. In the 10th District of North Carolina, two incumbents were pitted together, a Republican James Broyhill and Democrat Basil Whitener, and Mr. Broyhill has won that race. In Oklahoma, in the 4th District, Tom Steed, a Democrat, and Jim Smith, a Republican, two incumbents were redistricted together. The Democrats picked up that one. Just generally speaking, no change in Alabama, no change in Arkansas, no change in Florida, no apparent change in Georgia, no change in Kentucky or Louisiana or Mississippi, some shifting in North Carolina, no change in Oklahoma or South Carolina or Tennessee or Texas, and 1 or 2 seat shift in Virginia. Looking at the recap board briefly, if we can go there while they straighten out our numbers, we've got 75 Democrats elected, and 10, I've got to say, are leading for a total of 85 probable Democratic seats. 5 are still too close to call, and in the Republican column, 20 have been elected, 6 are leading, and 3 still too close to call. In a line, Walter, very little change in the South.
Roger, how are the Negro candidates for Congress faring in the South? Any of them making any headway at all?
The one race of particular interest was the 5th District of Alabama, which is Armistead Selden's old district. He retired, to run for the Senate and got beat. There was a Negro candidate in that district. I think the Negro vote registration is about 42%. He lost. The returns that we have indicate that that was the best chance they had.
Is that the Tuscaloosa district?
That's right. That's what's his name, the Reverend Branch.
Yeah.
I think the winner is a Democrat named Flowers.
The thought was he might slip in because he had 5
That's
white
right.
candidates against him or something like that. It might split the vote. Didn't work out that way.
He did not do it.
In Missouri, did elect a Negro congressman for the first time in its history. William L. Clay, a man who had served jail sentences for participating in civil rights demonstrations, was elected to succeed the retiring Frank Karsten in the state's 1st District. He defeated Republican Curtis C. Crawford, who was also a Negro, so there was going to be a black congressman from Missouri, regardless of how that race came out. Now, Joe Benny, what about the House races in the West?
Well, the 2 states that have the largest congressional delegations, Walter, are California and Washington, and we don't have enough in there yet. But the West is an interesting area to watch for one other reason. All of this talk about the possibility of the choice of the president going into the House of Representatives puts the West in a very strong position. There are 5 states in the United States that have 1 congressman, and 3 of them are in the far West. The 5 states are Delaware and Vermont, and then Alaska, Wyoming, and the state of Nevada. And Nevada and Wyoming each have a Republican and a Democrat. Democrat Walter Baring in Nevada looks like he's going to win. Republican John Wold in Wyoming has won, and they'll be going into the Congress with 1 vote apiece. And the other report where we're waiting for any kind of figures is Alaska. We have nothing on that. Howard Pollack is the Republican, and he's favored to win a 2nd term. This means that if you take those 5 states and project them into a possibility of voting for the presidency in the House of Representatives, those 5 congressmen have 10% of the vote, which is unlike the situation you have in most of the other states in the country. With the brief figures that we have in now, these early returns, we can tell you in the House where there were 69 seats going in the far West, the Democrats have elected 1, the Republicans 3. Both are leading with 4 more. And the new House so far then shows 5 Democrats and 7 Republicans. And we're waiting for Washington and California, Walter. Not only California for the House, but I'm sure, as everyone else, for the results on the Humphrey-Nixon race. And it's still 50-50 out there.
In the popular vote, we have 45% of the vote in now of the nation's precincts, and Humphrey is moving toward a 500,000 vote margin. He still is at 42% with Nixon 41%, but he has a 478,000 vote margin, as you see on your screen there. Wallace has dropped another 1% now to 16%. And it might be noted that one of the reasons third parties do have this trouble in getting out the vote is because they don't have the organization down the precinct level to get out the vote. But it was thought that Wallace, having built up an organization to get on the ballot with this petition drive, might change that picture. It doesn't look as if he did. Now, from Maryland, we now have all of our sample precincts in that important state that Humphrey had hoped to win, that Nixon had practically in private given to him, but which in the polls showed as coming out even. Well, all of our sample precincts are now in, and we show Maryland exactly even, with Nixon and Humphrey each getting 42% of the vote, Wallace getting a larger percentage in Maryland than the polls had indicated by about 6%, for a total of 16% of the vote in our sample precincts, enough to keep either of the men from a victory in our estimate. And all the votes are going to have to be counted before Maryland can be put in one man's column or another. CBS News color coverage of Election Night 68 will continue in a moment. We have some CBS News estimates on some important state races. First, Joe Benty in the West.
Walter, in Utah, Calvin Rampton has won his second term to the governorship of that state. Buhner, a novice Republican entering statewide politics for the first time, has been defeated. And the VPA estimate, or our CBS News estimate, that Rampton is the winner. He is known in Utah as a can-do governor, and the big issue on the ballot there was not so much who was going to win what office, but liquor by the drink, and we don't have any report on that yet in Utah. In Montana, Forrest Anderson, the state's attorney general, three-term attorney general, took on Tim Babcock, and the issue was the sales tax. And as someone pointed out here, there's another governor who went to his political grave via the sales tax route. Babcock said he wanted a sales tax. Anderson said if he were elected, he would veto it, and the state legislature already once had vetoed it. And Babcock is the loser, an incumbent Republican, that office going to Forrest Anderson, a Democrat. And Alan Bible, the incumbent senator in the state of Nevada, has won re-election, beating Ed Fike, the state's lieutenant governor, young Republican who had done very well, surprisingly well for any Republican in the city of Las Vegas, which was about 3-1 Democratic, but he wasn't able to do it this time, so Alan Bible is back in the Senate. Walter?
Roger Mudd, you've got one in the South.
Walter, we're still hung up in the South on Texas and in Tennessee. And in the popular vote in Texas, 57% of that vote is in. And Hubert Humphrey has got a lead of 650,000 to Nixon's 617,000. We reported earlier that Nixon was doing well in the cities, Dallas, Fort Worth. He's barely holding his own, however, in Houston. And that's the trouble sign right there. Wallace is running a very poor third. In Tennessee, with...
Roger?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but a little cue here. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters.
I know that.
Well, why don't you say so, and then I don't have to? You see, we still, some of our local stations still want to give a few returns on things like sale by the drink in Virginia and elsewhere, and horse race betting and things of that kind. Now,
are we on the air now?
Yes, we are.
Oh, I see. All right. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that.
Roger, come along.
All right.
Now, tell us about the gubernatorial race in Texas, which I'm just dying to hear about.
All right. Well,
Before you do that, though, before you do that, let me point out that Humphrey has now moved his margin to a full 2%. With 46% of the vote in the country, Humphrey is now 41% of the vote, and Nixon has 39% of the vote, unless those figures change it, and apparently they do not. 15,213,000, 14,701,000. Humphrey has got his 500,000 vote lead, and Wallace now is at 16%. Go ahead, Roger.
Well, we'll go back to Texas just briefly, and there we have a CBS News estimate in the gubernatorial race. Really no surprise. Preston Smith, the conservative lieutenant governor, winning over Paul Eggers. That's 56% of the popular vote in. The CBS News estimate shows Smith will take it all, 56%, Mr. Eggers, 44%. I'd like to take a look at the Tennessee presidential popular vote. 90% of that vote is in. Nixon 403,000. Wallace running a pretty good third, and Humphrey trailing, I would have to say, badly. And finally, in South Carolina, we want to take one last look there because the last time we had a definite CBS News estimate, Richard Nixon is going to carry South Carolina, and that certainly pumps up Strom Thurmond's power in South Carolina. With 78% of the vote in, Nixon 193,000. And the secret there was that from Columbia all the way down to the sea, down to Charleston, as they say in South Carolina, that's where the Ashley and the Cooper meet to form the Atlantic. Richard Nixon has carried South Carolina. All right, Walter.
Certain local pride comes out of the boy, doesn't it, from that part of the country. From the east, I think you've got a call or two there, Mike.
I do, Walter, but first of all, I wonder if you could explain what you mean by sail by the drink. I know that you're a sailor, and I know that you occasionally will...
It's not sail by the drink, S-A-I-L.
Oh.
S-A-L-E by the drink.
I see. Now, let's see. First of all, we have a call in the New Hampshire senatorial race. The incumbent Republican, Senator Norris Cotton, conservative senator from New Hampshire, has defeated Governor John King, who is leaving the State House and ran against Cotton and has been defeated 58,000 to 36,000, with 56% of the tabulated vote accounted for. And we have what I suppose must be regarded by a good many people as a kind of sad story in the state of Rhode Island. It looks as though Governor John Chafee is going to be... Oh, now, wait a minute. Those figures are changing right now. Let's take a look at those boards. With 82% of the vote counted, Chafee is leading Leach, the Democratic challenger, 63,000 to 40,000, although my information prior to the last 5 or 10 minutes was that Chafee was losing. So signals are off. Maybe it isn't going to be such a sad story for John Chafee. I say sad story because there was a tragedy in his family last month. His young daughter died in a horseback riding accident. As you saw, the CBS News estimate is that Leach is indeed going to take that by 53 to 47, the way things are going now. And one additional House race that's of interest in the East, Shirley Chisholm, a Democrat, has defeated, according to the Associated Press, James Farmer, the former national director of the Congress of Racial Equality, running as a Republican with Liberal Party support. Mrs. Chisholm won in this newly realigned 12th congressional district in Brooklyn, which is a largely black ghetto area, Bedford-Stuyvesant and Puerto Rican. She will be the first Negro woman to enter the House of Representatives. Walter?
And I believe Adam Clayton Powell won again in Harlem, didn't he, with 80% of the vote or something like that.
Yes.
The United Press International is now saying that Humphrey will carry Texas. We're not prepared at CBS to say that yet. It still looks to us too close to call at this point, but the UPI is giving those 25 important electoral votes, one of the 5 states which apparently will make the decision here tonight. We're waiting for Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, Texas, and California. Those are the states which apparently will tip the balance one way or the other on this big election night and this very, very close race. As close a race as we've had in this country, certainly since the Kennedy-Nixon race of 1960. It looks like it's going to be closer than that, with the added factor that George Wallace's American Independent Party is going to take at least 39 electoral votes, possibly 45. It may be just enough in a very close race to force this election into the House of Representatives. At the moment, there is this, well, let's first go to Dan Rather, because we haven't had a report on that Illinois senatorial race in quite a while, Dan. I thought we could at least get a quick read on how that's going.
Right, very quickly, Walter, and it's much closer than anyone had expected in Illinois between the national monument of a senator, Republican Everett Dirksen, and William Clark, the Attorney General. With 29% of the vote counted in Illinois, Clark leads Dirksen by the figures that you see. Most of the Clark vote coming from the Chicago area. The machine of Mayor Richard Daley has delivered for the Democrats in Chicago. Hubert Humphrey also leading in Illinois in the presidential race with 35% of the vote tabulated. The question at the moment, Walter, is whether the downstate vote in Illinois is going to pull Everett Dirksen through to yet another victory, and will it also be enough to overcome Hubert Humphrey's early lead?
Well, thank you, Dan. With the popular vote now, 41% for Humphrey and 39% for Nixon, with 48% of the vote in. There are several ways to figure what is. Getting interesting cues here. It's perhaps one of the nicest cues I get all evening, just a few minutes of silence. That probably is welcome across the country. There are many ways to figure what the future holds tonight, and adding and juggling these figures. And almost any way you juggle them right at the moment, it indicates that Hubert Humphrey is going to have to take most of these outstanding states, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, Texas, and California, and UPI already gives him Texas, we do not yet, in order to win. It kind of figures out this way. If you give Nixon the 172 electoral votes that we have him leading and winning in at the moment, well, that figure shows the 161 that he has won, not counting those he's leading in, which would leave him 109 he needs. Well, now, Associated Press gives him Maryland and Delaware. If you add those along, he would have 202 electoral votes. Still out, California with 40, Illinois with 26, Missouri with 12, Ohio with 26, Texas with 25, New Jersey with its important block of 17 votes. Now, if Nixon's favored in Washington and Alaska, two of the states out also with 12 electoral votes together. If Nixon needs just 68 more electoral votes, giving him Maryland and Delaware, or 56 if he gets Washington and Alaska as expected, then he can win with any of these possible combinations, counting Washington and Alaska for him. He can get Illinois, Ohio, and Maryland, or Missouri rather, that would give it to him. California, Illinois would give it to him, just those two. California and Texas. Now UPI says he's not going to get Texas. California, Ohio. Any of those combinations would give it to Nixon. In other words, he could win it in California if he got Illinois, Ohio, and Missouri. Otherwise, he needs California in any of these combinations. So California, Joe Benty, about in your area, sure adds up to be pivotal tonight. Eric Severide, Ted White, we're watching one of the most amazing comebacks in political history, I suppose, tonight. It certainly qualifies alongside of that of Harry Truman, although Hubert Humphrey hasn't pulled the victory out of the hat yet. He has certainly thrown a scare into the Republicans who thought just a fortnight ago that they were sailing away to an easy victory.
Yes, this thing was in September. The polls, most of them giving Nixon about a 16% lead over Humphrey. And now at this moment tonight, Mr. Humphrey has plurality over Mr. Nixon, the popular vote. Eddie White and I have been trying to talk about this as much as one can from these figures. But Teddy, how, forgetting the future of the evening for a moment, how did this all come about in your mind, this closing of the gap so rapidly and so extraordinarily?
Peace, I guess. Peace and the sheer gallantry and drive of Hubert Humphrey. I suppose every man will mark the turning point, if it really came, in his own way. I think it came in Los Angeles about 10 days ago when Nixon raised the question of security gap, and Hubert leaped on it, just like that in that telecast from Beverly Hilton Hotel. He never let up on that for a day, the security gap, pinning the label on Nixon of almost being a hawk, a warmonger, in a nation which craved peace. And then, of course, there came that this fantastic last weekend in which peace seemed almost imminent. It seems a bit farther away tonight than it seemed Thursday or Friday. If you talk to the pollsters, they say that by Saturday they began to pick up a huge flip to Hubert, chiefly among women, curiously enough.
Yes, we heard there was a big change among the women. At any rate, everybody wants peace in this country. This is obvious. What movement there was, how authentic and how well it'll work, we don't know. But what movement there was associated with Johnson and then with Humphrey. This must have had some difference in people's minds. Nixon, as the outsider in this situation, couldn't do much about it. But I wonder if, people said Humphrey started too late in his campaign. I wonder if it might not be argued that, I'm not assuming Nixon's lost this yet, he can still win this, of course, but maybe he started too early. And there was too much Nixon, too much exposure, too much television, too many of those spots.
I don't know. You could say that. There is the fact that the Republican Party is the minority party in this country. I think Nixon always had to make a breakout from that Republican base. He's held his Republican base. Done much better than Barry Goldwater, far better. But the breakthrough that he had hoped for into the great middle ground, middle class of America, hasn't happened.
Now, that's one of the troubles for the future, if he should win, too, because he's not getting the cities. This thing is going pretty overwhelmingly, as far as we can see, to the Democrats and Mr. Humphrey. And that's where the trouble in this country really lies.
I think he's entirely conscious of that. He's made, although he's going to get a very small percentile of the Negro vote tonight, he's made the most enormous efforts to build bridges to Negro leadership, whether or not they will vote for him all across the country. As it stands right now, either he or Humphrey will be a minority president.
Do you suppose that Mr. Nixon could win in the electoral vote and be behind Humphrey in the popular vote before this is over?
That's what the figures are telling us this evening, and these figures worry me a great deal.
Well, that's a very rare thing, Teddy. I think that's only happened 3 times in our history. Jackson, Tilden, Cleveland.
That's right.
We're a long way back.
Long way back. I think whoever's elected will get the lowest percentage of the popular vote since Abraham Lincoln and face a country divided.
He had only about 39%,
That's
something
right.
like that. Still, he was quite a man. But think of another possibility here. Suppose that this goes into the House of Representatives. We do have a hung jury tonight, and Humphrey has a plurality of the popular vote over Nixon. Nixon has said that in that situation, it should go to the one with the highest popular vote, as I recollect, hasn't he?
Yes, he did, but I believe it was a qualified statement. I can't recall it offhand. I've heard it on TV several times. He'll have to explain that, although I think it's too early for us even to pick a winner tonight.
It is. But you can see all kinds of combinations of difficulties, legal, moral, and other ones.
And international.
Indeed so, if this goes to the House.
If this goes to the House, and for 2 months America is leaderless, I wonder how the Paris negotiations will be conducted. I wonder what the effect will be upon the boys in the field in Vietnam tonight. I think any decisive choice should please any American, no matter what his party.
Yes, we're going to want a decision one way or another. The worst thing is going to be indecision. The generals say in a battle, when in doubt, you got to do something, but if you can't do anything till January, you can't do it.
Well, I guess we're just going to have to play it cool, the entire nation. There are constitutional procedures set out, and I think we ought to just stand with those constitutional procedures, however ridiculous they may seem to the outside world.
They haven't been tested in some respects, and that's one of the troubles. Walter?
We just racked up 50% of the vote here, and Hubert Humphrey has almost an 800,000 vote lead at this point, 41% to 39. Down in Montgomery, Alabama, George Wallace has just arrived at his headquarters, and Nelson Benton is there. Nelson?
Walter, at the podium right now is Albert Brewer, the current governor of Alabama, the lieutenant governor who succeeded Lurleen when she died. And General LeMay and Governor Wallace have come to the podium just moments before. With them are their families, Mrs. LeMay with General LeMay, Governor Wallace's mother, his 2 brothers, the higher-ranking members of his staff. Seymour Trammell, who's his finance director, Bill Jones, his former press secretary and sort of field tactician, and Governor Brewer is in the process, presumably, of introducing George Wallace now. Here first is General Curtis LeMay. While we're waiting this ovation, Walter, we might say it's smaller than those we've seen before.
I think it's a little bit early to talk about the results of the election as yet. Governor Wallace is better qualified than I am to discuss that anyway. It was just 32 days ago that I made the decision to join Governor Wallace in his crusade. It only took me about 3 days to convince myself that I'd made the right decision. I have spent a long time, over 2 months, and trying to analyze the pros and cons of taking this step. And I knew what the odds were of winning, and this had nothing to do with the final decision that I made. I believe that before any balloting took place, that I'd accomplished most of my goals. Certainly, we've made a tremendous impact on the country that's going to be felt for a long time. If you add the popular vote of the American Independent Party with the Republican Party, the last figures I saw came nearly 60% of the American people who are dissatisfied with the trend towards socialism that we've encountered in the past 8 years. Before the end of the evening, as a matter of fact, I think it'll be in tomorrow before we really know, it may turn out the American Independent Party is more important than we ever thought it would be. Mrs. LeMay and I want to thank all of you for the wonderful support we've received. And we certainly have enjoyed meeting many, many wonderful people during the campaign. We both thank you.
General Curtis LeMay, and now Governor Albert Brewer of Alabama back on the podium, presumably now, Walter, to introduce the presidential candidate.
Lovely and gracious wife, we'd like to express our appreciation for her being here tonight to share this evening with us in Alabama. You know, a few weeks ago we had a big rally here in Montgomery, the only rally that Governor Wallace had in the state of Alabama. And from the election results, it must have been a most successful rally, Governor. I had the privilege of presenting him to you and to all of those others assembled at that time. And tonight it's a great honor and privilege for me to again present to a group of devoted and loyal followers who have assisted and aided in this movement that began in Alabama in 1963, the man who has spearheaded it, who's been the voice of it, who with your help has sustained it across this country. Our friend, the former governor of Alabama, the Honorable George C. Wallace.
That's Governor Wallace's youngest child there with him. She has campaigned with him occasionally, although she hasn't been away from the campaign trail recently.
Well, Governor, I want to thank you, Governor Brewer, for not only being with us tonight, but the support you've given to our movement, which is part of your movement, that of the people of Alabama. And as General LeMay said a moment ago, the election, of course, is not over. And I think everybody understands that at the present time. I again want to thank General LeMay for running on our ticket, a man who has served our country ably and well, a great patriot, a man, as I said last night on television, or either on the Sunday show, Winston Churchill had said was largely responsible for peace in the world during the last 2 decades. And so I'm very grateful. A man who helped defeat the Nazis and the fascists in World War II and helped to save at least 1 million lives in that conflict by bringing an end to it, the Empire of Japan. So, General and Ms. LeMay, thank you for being with us. I want to present to you briefly, without taking up too much of your time, but I do want to say that we have with us tonight former governor of Georgia who contributed so much to our effort, because in the beginning, when we had to comply with the provisions of a number of state statutes, it was necessary to have a vice presidential running mate at that time. And so he agreed to stand in, and therefore has contributed as much as any individual to our movement. So Governor Griffin of Georgia, thank you for being with us tonight, and I want to thank you.
Governor Wallace, General and Mrs. LeMay, ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow Americans, I want to assure your distinguished former governor and the man who is responsible for taking the message throughout the length and the breadth of our great country that America needs to return to sane and sensible government. I would like to assure the distinguished standard bearer and his distinguished running mate, General LeMay, that what little bit I have contributed to this campaign, it has been certainly a labor of love, because I don't know at any other time in the history of our great country when we have needed two courageous and outstanding Americans to speak out for what they believe to be right, and to speak out at a time.
That's Governor Marvin Griffin, who stood in for as vice presidential candidate on the George Wallace ticket for some time. And we can presume now there are a lot of people on the stage, Walter, and presumably they will all be introduced before the candidate himself gets around to making his substantive remarks. And we'll give you a yell when we get to that point. Walter?
Nelson, the Associated Press has now joined UP International in giving Humphrey the state of Texas. CBS believes it's still too close for us to call it. 51% of the vote in now, and Humphrey's margin has been cut a little bit by Nixon. He has a 1% margin now, 41% to 40, with a little over a 600,000 vote lead. CBS News color coverage of election night 68 will continue in a moment. There is our green bubble with the cameraman ensconced therein. We've had some people asking tonight what the green bubbles are. That's what they are. Our cameramen are inside of them. We have some rather disturbing news, I suppose, in a way. It may be a half hour before we get any more tabulated vote on the national vote picture. The entire NES computer compilation for all of the news services, all of the networks, and the United Press and AP, the newspapers, everybody who's gathering returns tonight, it's down. And they say it may be a half hour before we get more returns. That stops with 51% of the vote in, the clock stopping at 1 minute to midnight, as it were. However, we'll be getting, presumably, some raw returns state by state in our CBS News estimates, I hope. At any rate, we'll give you everything that comes across our desk, and it'll be as fast as possible. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Election Headquarters. CBS News estimates that in Rhode Island, well, let me let Mike Wallace tell you what happened in Rhode Island. He's been keeping right on top of that Rhode Island gubernatorial race, and I think we have a CBS News estimate now. Mike?
Well, according to our NES board, our tabulated vote board, that is, 89% of the vote is in Rhode Island. And as you can see, Governor John Chafee ostensibly is running ahead of Frank Leach, his Democratic challenger, but that's not the way it is. According to CBS News estimate, with 98% of our sample precincts in, Leach unseats Chafee in his bid for a fourth term as governor of Rhode Island, 53% to 47%. And I believe that probably what did John Chafee in Rhode Island, as it does with many sitting governors from time to time, is taxes. Chafee had proposed a personal income tax of from 2% to 10%, combined with a sales tax reduction, other minor changes in the tax structure in Rhode Island. Leach called for a tax of 10% on income from investments and savings accounts. Central debate over which tax would raise the most money, least painfully, I guess. And of course, added to that was the sweep by Hubert Humphrey in the state of Rhode Island. So John Chafee, one of the best liked of the nation's governors, one of the most capable of the nation's Republican governors, goes down to defeat. I suppose that the best way to tell the story of what is going on as far as the presidential vote in the East is concerned is to run just three boards, Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey. Let's take a look at the Delaware tabulated vote. With 95% of that tabulated vote in now, Nixon leads Humphrey by something like 6,000 votes or a little less, Wallace with 24,000. It would seem then that Nixon is going to be the winner in Delaware, but our VPA precincts don't show that trend in such a way as to satisfy us, and so we are not calling that race either way for the time being. Let's move to Maryland, with 90% of the tabulated vote in. Humphrey leading Nixon by something like 8,000 votes or a little less. Again, too close to call. In Maryland, it's about 42% and 42% for Humphrey and Nixon, and that race is simply just going to have to go on down to the wire on the tabulated vote. We're unwilling to take a chance and call it one way or the other, with the race so close between the vice president and the former vice president. And finally, in New Jersey, with 70% of that vote now tabulated, Nixon leading by something like 20,000 votes, a little bit over 20,000 votes, and as you can see, 30% of that vote still to be counted, Wallace running at about 180,000. According to our CBS News estimate in New Jersey, I believe Wallace has about 11 or 12% of that vote, but Nixon was leading 47 to 41% a little while ago. Now that figure is down. That race, too, is too close to call. Those three races in the East still to be decided.
The CBS News estimate in Nevada now gives Nevada to Richard Nixon, as was expected there, with 46% of the vote, Humphrey 42. Humphrey ran a closer race than anticipated in Nevada. Wallace got 12% of the vote there. And with those three electoral votes now, Richard Nixon has 164 electoral votes, Humphrey 143. Nixon is 106 electoral votes away from that 270 needed for a clear majority to win the presidency in the Electoral College, where it must be won, as you know. Let's take a look now at our map. The dark areas are for Nixon. They show light blue in a color set. The light areas are for Hubert Humphrey. They show yellow on a color set. And the striped areas are for George Wallace. Well, Nixon has won with just 50% of the popular vote in, and that's just right even between Nixon and Humphrey. Nixon has won 24 states, but they are the low electoral vote states. None of the really big ones are in there. Humphrey has won the big ones that CBS News estimates so far can be counted in one column or another. Let me read off quickly the 24 Nixon states. They are Kentucky, Florida, North Carolina, Indiana, Kansas, Vermont, Oklahoma, Virginia, Arizona, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Oregon, South Carolina, Idaho, Utah, New Mexico, and Nevada. Now, Humphrey has won just 10 states, but they're big ones. He won Connecticut, West Virginia, the District of Columbia. They're not so big, but look at these. Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania, and as well as his home state of Minnesota and of Rhode Island and of Maine. Wallace has won 4 states in the South across that belt of southern states that have gone for states' rights candidates and independent elector schemes and other such third-party movements in the past. They are Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana. CBS News color coverage of Election Night 68 will continue in a moment after this pause for station identification.
CBS News coverage of Election Night 68. Reporting from election headquarters, Walter Cronkite.
Here at our CBS News election headquarters, it's an amazing story that is unfolding on our adding machines as the votes pour in from across the country. A very close race, perhaps the closest in the nation's history. Hubert Humphrey staging an amazing comeback, coming off of the floor, the bloodstained floor of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago to run an even race here with Richard Nixon tonight. Nixon coming back from his defeat in the 1960 presidential election and the 1962 gubernatorial election in California. Coming back the hard way, campaigning across this nation for Republican candidates for local offices, the Senate, the House of Representatives, for governorships, until he had built enough IOUs across the country to be the man for the Republican National Convention and the man to have a second chance at the presidential race. It's a comeback story for both of them, for whoever wins tonight, a dramatic saga. With 51% of the vote in now, and the tabulators are working again, we gather, but Humphrey has 17,084,000, 41% of the vote. Nixon 16,447,000, 40% of the vote. You see that Nixon has closed a little bit in the last few tabulations there until now he's just a little over 600,000 votes behind. At one time it was almost 800,000 votes. Wallace has 6,600,000 votes for 16% of the vote. A little, quite a bit lower than Wallace had hoped to get, and he has not done well in the North and the East and the Middle West, where he had hoped to make some strides. David Culhane is at the Nixon headquarters for a report on the very nervous watching and waiting there. David?
Walter, the contrast is rather extraordinary. I've been watching you all evening. The gravity of the situation, the uncertainty of the election is not reflected here at all. All of these people are absolutely certain that they're in the winning camp. They've been celebrating all evening as if the whole thing were over. I'm not sure that they are entirely up to date on what's going on, but that's the situation, as I'm sure you can see here. They've been dancing and listening to Lionel Hampton and just generally having a good time. One other thing that strikes me